everyone. I'm Padmini Arhant, author, presenter, padminiarhant.com, prakriti.padminiarhant.com, representing the Divine Mission. The topic is Gaza War. Gaza War started subsequent to Hamas attack on Israel October 7, 2023. Israel had commenced its warfare against not just Hamas, as a matter of fact, the entire Palestinian population. I had already presented regarding this event when it just began on October 7, 2023. And subsequently, I updated my views via presentation, but otherwise, I have been relentlessly writing about the Gaza war ever since it started on October 7, 2023. Now, the war is, I guess, 107 or 108 days old, definitely well over 3 months. And the outcome is massive casualties. Palestinian population, especially in Gaza, the estimate is around 28,000, if I'm not mistaken. It could be a little higher than what I saw at least a couple of days ago. Again, this is not counting the casualties perhaps lying under the rubbles. And if that were to be taken into account, easily the casualties would be anywhere between 30 to 40 or 50,000 and more. But then there are also those who have been severely injured. And again, the details are extremely worrisome for the children who have been affected in this battle are not going to have immediate recovery. And unfortunately, even that has been made impossible due to the denial of humanitarian aid, as we all know. All of this is extremely unfortunate. Again, the international community has been relentlessly involved, sharing their voice and concerns. And we have seen protests worldwide. Almost every corner of the world, or at least in most major cities around the world, citizens have come together and demonstrated against this relentless warfare in Gaza. What happened prior to October 7, and that has already been shared by me. Nonetheless, what is really important right now is for the Israeli citizens, their loved ones are held hostages by Hamas, but then we also have to take into account Israel holding thousands of Palestinians hostages in the disclosed and undisclosed locations. It's called the Administrative Detention Center, where minors have been held by Israeli authorities over a period of time, much to international condemnation. But then nothing ever has been done about it. But then in the course of this October 7 attack and Israel's retaliation against entire Palestine, the hostage exchange that took place with Israelis citizens held hostage by Hamas were released, I believe, around 135, if I'm not mistaken, 135, around that figure. Hostages were released by Hamas. In exchange, Israel released some of the hostages Israel has been holding in the prison. Again, it's all in Palestinian territory, but then it's on Israel's control and oversight. The Israeli hostages who were released by Hamas, as we witnessed, were handed over securely, and they seem to be not terribly distressed, even though they might have experienced the natural fear and anxiety. Nonetheless, compared to the Palestinian prisoners or hostages rather released by Israeli authorities, they had some very regretful and painful experience to share with their family and those who happen to watch their accounts on social media. It is definitely not something that anyone can possibly go through, endure for such a long time, and yet they all were forced to do that. These are all the things that needs to be taken into account when this matter is being reviewed by international authorities and community at large. Now, when we talk about the ceasefire, which again has been requested by international community worldwide, and there has also been nations at the United Nations General Assembly who had cast their vote expressing the immediate need for permanent ceasefire, allowing humanitarian aid to go through Gaza to help the wounded victims and the casualties from this war in Gaza. But then Israeli authorities, especially Prime Minister Netanyahu, has been adamant in denying humanitarian access to the people in Gaza. It started right from day one when the Gaza war began. Since then, until now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vehemently opposed any humanitarian access to the people in Gaza, much to international community frustration and disappointment. Now, the situation is dire, and as expected, the Gaza war is not limited to the territory in Gaza. The Gaza war has conflated across the region. Now, Middle East is extremely tense. Not that it hasn't been before. Middle East has always been kept volatile by forces who are interested and invested in economic interest and strategic dominance. They've always made sure that Middle East remain volatile. It has been that way for quite some time. But then prior to Gaza war, at least there were some developments among Arab nations wanting to make peace with the state of Israel. But then when the Hamas attack took place and Israel retaliation became so violent and aggressive, not heeding any international concerns and call for Israel to relent to peaceful negotiations. But then Israeli Prime Minister has been extremely determined to continue this warfare indefinitely. And now we are witnessing Middle East in turmoil. There are airstrikes, missiles, bombs, all kinds of military interventions and actions are taking place from different directions. This was completely unnecessary, and it has been provoked by none other than Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The reason being, when this Gaza war began on October 7, and then when there were progress in terms of exchanging the Israeli hostages for Palestinian hostages held by Israel, that was the moment for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and those who are misguiding, and I underscore misguiding the Prime Minister, to continue the military aggression, which I firmly believe as genocide, as much as the rest of the world. They do consider this a genocide when civilian population have been relentlessly attacked with no mercy, not sparing hospitals, residential buildings, schools, mosques, even university, and there is nothing left. It is now being reduced to rubble. And where are we now? Now that the war has conflated across the region and Middle East is so tense that all of the nations are on alert. And not just the nations in the Middle East. Now it so happens that it has even spread across the other parts of the world, such as the Indian subcontinent. I will get back to that later in this topic, but right now I would like to focus on the warfare Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has continued and insists on maintaining as long as it takes, apparently. It is not sure what kind of time frame Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is counting on. Nonetheless, the IDF military commanders, who know better than the political leadership in Israel, according to them, the situation is rather dire, and that is the Israeli forces deployed in Gaza on the ground are now fairly limited. This is according to the IDF military commander accounts on the ongoing war in Gaza. And they realistically think that this war is unwinnable, and this whole idea of dismantling Hamas and freeing hostages without ceasefire in Gaza and denying Palestinian population any hope, any opportunity for their statehood, their sovereignty, not to mention the open discussion about forceful evacuation, which has already happened anyways. Considerable population has been forcefully evacuated from the war zone with relentless bombing. Those who managed to stay, even their lives have not been spared. So this Nakba has already taken place since October 7th, Israel war against Gaza. The Israeli leadership not having any concrete game plan, that is also something that has been shared as a major concern by IDF military commanders, that the political leadership in Israel is lacking in any form of military plan, for this has been impulsive, more politically driven warfare. When it began, the expectation perhaps was that it would be over and done with in a matter of days or a week or weeks. Probably the Israeli leadership did not think that this warfare would get dragged on more than 3 months, which is what has happened right now. And it is likely to continue beyond. And again, there is no time frame either. But meanwhile, the hostages held by Hamas, and that goes for the population in Gaza, they are paying the price. For some of them, perhaps might have been killed. One hopes it is not the case. I'm referring to the Israeli hostages, but then with Israel's bombing, relentless bombing on Gaza, and all these airstrikes, courtesy United States, I would also like to emphasize that the war has been triggered, funded, facilitated, and propelled by United States politics. Unfortunately, United States, the so-called Democrat administration in power, and that goes for bipartisan Congress who have been in the front line, campaigning, rallying, and also authorizing without any reservations and unconditionally granting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu billions, around $14 billion of American taxpayers' money have been granted to kill innocent civilian population in Gaza, not barring the infants in incubators, children, the ailing at the hospitals, the ones who were getting medical treatment for whatever health issues, their admission in hospital, and Israel bombing those hospitals, which cannot be denied, for all of it is documented and verified by media, the eyewitness accounts, as well as the families fleeing the war zone. And they've accounted for it with the visual content, the video recording of these bombings by Israel on hospitals and so many civilian areas, which is completely unacceptable, and it is war crime. When we talk about Russia-Ukraine war, and when similar events have been happening, and that is the problem with warfare. The warring factions, they get carried away. And then when one side hits any civilian areas, the other side retaliates accordingly. They don't really hold back. And this becomes like we have to settle scores. If we have been hit in our civilian areas, the facilities, then the immediate response is to target something similar on the other side. And that is the reason why it is always advised, but then who is there to listen to advice when war is always considered the most preferred choice in politics? And that's also because of those who are profiteering from such warfare. They're also behind the continuation of relentless wars, no matter where it begins, wherever it's happening. They do not want to see the warfare end sooner, and if at all they can, and they always succeed in prolonging the warfare, and it so happens that it also gets conflated and it gets across the region, as it is happening right now in the Middle East. So what do we do? The most important thing that needs to be done right now is for Israeli politics, Israeli political leadership to heed their own military commanders' advice, and they have expressed that ceasefire is necessary, and ceasefire is not something that should be considered as an option, but it has become mandatory for the shelling and bombing to cease. So the ceasefire is absolutely the most important and number one priority to begin with. Secondly, Israel needs to think about the situation, not just to end this war or gain the hostages and then go back to square one. That has been the problem. If Palestinian and Israel conflict and this dispute has continued for such a long time, over 7 decades now, I guess it's almost 76 years, and it has not been resolved is simply because there is no agreement or even acknowledgement, as it happens right now, for Palestinian statehood. So I'm going to emphasize without any reservations or prejudice that the most important factor for Israel and Palestine to exist peacefully is for Israeli leadership, Israeli political members, regardless of which faction they are from. They need to recognize the fact that Palestinian independence, Palestinian statehood is the only way, and it's the only solution for Israel and the citizens in Israel to exist in peace. Everyone deserves to exist in peace, and everyone, regardless of where they are from, where they are living, and now with reference to the people in Israel and the people in the entire Palestine, for them to go back to living normal life, it is absolutely essential for the political leadership to recognize and come to the agreement that the Palestinian statehood and independence could no longer be denied, could no longer be delayed, and as a matter of fact, that needs to be settled now. That is the only way Israel can live in peace, and there is no other situation that could possibly facilitate for any kind of maneuvering. And this whole agenda of Israeli authorities, especially from what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has openly let the world know, that Israel would maintain if the Prime Minister were to remain in power, and looks like that has been the objective of this leadership, which is really unfortunate. And this is not even taking into account own citizens' lives. The people in Israel have now taken to the streets, and now they are demanding for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step down from office and allow Israel the early election so that they can choose another leadership or government that would be more realistic and understanding. Politics has a problem in understanding people's issues, people's requirements, and the situation that politics creates for making people's life miserable, that is never acknowledged, and there is no responsibility taken as well. That is the problem with politics. There is no hesitation problem about creating catastrophe and security issues and all that. But then when push comes to shove, politics always looks out for some bizarre explanations and rely on blaming on someone else, scapegoat somebody else. But then they never acknowledge responsibility for their own wrongdoings or bad decisions, dereliction of duty, as it happens in Israel's Hamas attack. The issue right now is to end this war. For the people in Gaza have taken a lot in terms of this bombing and shelling, continuous military aggression. Even if there was any humanitarian pause, as it happened to be, I guess when the war started and at the heat of international protest and demonstrations worldwide, the so-called humanitarian pause that took place, again, fortunately, that facilitated the release of 135 Israeli hostages in exchange for the Palestinian hostages held in Israel's control and custody. Otherwise, I guess even that would not have materialized. Like I said just now, that was the moment Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu could have gone ahead with permanent ceasefire and released the Palestinian population held as hostages in Israeli prison or the prison managed by Israel, and that could have also allowed for the remaining Israeli hostages to come home. But instead, just having had the 135 Israeli hostages, the miscalculation on Israeli political leadership was that in accelerating the warfare, the idea was Hamas would be dismantled, or the entire Hamas leadership would be killed. And as it so happens that some of them have been assassinated from news reports, but still it does not mean that Hamas has evaporated. It has not been eradicated, but that is not something that should be the agenda. If Hamas is dismantled or removed as per Israeli political leadership's aspiration, and it appears that it is also backed by European Union, not necessarily the people of the EU member states, but it happens that the EU politics from the latest vote that has taken place on this issue, where they have demanded that basically echoing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's message, or rather rhetoric, that Hamas should be dismantled and all Israeli hostages should be released unconditionally, which again is not something that one would call it reasonable. This is again not surprising, considering that EU had also initially gone ahead, and especially Germany, not all EU member states to be fair, it's Germany who had released earlier on that Israel could take as long as it requires to eradicate, quote unquote, eradicate Hamas. So I think the Western expectation that the forces who emerge from population out of frustration, and again, when there has been this prolonged oppression, apartheid, colonization, illegal occupation of their whatever territories that are left right now, and then the international community had not really done much in terms of getting this issue resolved on a permanent basis. Again, I'm not denying that there were attempts made. There were several attempts made, but then when the negotiations are held in such a manner that one side who is definitely at an advantage, in this instance it has always been Israel having had a state, which it does, and that it's called the State of Israel, and which has been acknowledged and recognized as a sovereign nation. And then Israel is also a nuclear state, which has not been openly disclosed by Israel. Nonetheless, Israel is a nuclear state. Israel has tremendous defense power, alongside United States being the frontline defense authority protecting Israel. As it so happens, even now, it's not really protection of Israel, it's basically promoting Israel's aggression against the civilians in Gaza and the rest of Palestine. When we really analyze the situation right from the beginning, Israel has always been at an advantage. Yet Israel has always considered itself the victim, when Israel has been the victimizer. It is really necessary for Israeli politics and those who are involved in guiding and promoting, protecting Israel's rights, etc. They need to also recognize the one who has suffered enormously is the people in Palestine with no statehood. I mean, they have been left the refugees in their own homeland. right from the time Israel was created on the land of Palestine, which I have explained and elaborated in detail in my previous presentation. So when Israel was created in Palestine, 1948, there was Nakba, there was forceful evacuation of Palestinians. Since then, the Palestinians have not been allowed to settle in their homes and towns, villages, and then with this continuous occupation, seizure of land in West Bank with illegal settlements, again, which has all been condemned by international community. But Israel had never stopped. It has not relented to international community requesting these settlements to end and to return the land that actually belongs to the Palestinians in the West Bank, and that goes for in East Jerusalem. And the constant humiliation, the criminalization and extension of Israeli settlers on their part, their violent altercations and interaction with the Palestinian people in the villages and towns. The world have noted all of that, and people who have also visited these areas, these territories, they have also accounted for it. So this is not something that could be taken as make-believe and something that is fabricated. This is the problem here. Israel is and has always been at a great advantage, having its own state, a sovereign state, an independent state, while denying the Palestinians any statehood, any form of liberty, any independence. And the way Israel has controlled Gaza, if Israel is talking about Hamas, Hamas is created by Israel. Israel's occupation and colonization is the reason that Hamas is there today. Why is it that this is not being recognized by Israeli leadership? Had Israel not continued with its colonization and ended its illegal occupation and come around and acknowledged the fair deal is to allow the Palestinians to remain in their native land, their territories. This is pre-1967, and blockade on Gaza that was absolutely illegal. Nonetheless, that has remained effective for so long, and this has all been under Israel's control. So Israel has been controlling air, water, land for Palestinians all along, where that has led Israel and Palestine today. And now Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is insisting that is the way it will be moving forward. And why is it that politics never want to learn lessons from their mistakes? Only if they were to consider that as a mistake, perhaps. And that never happens, unfortunately. When this has already been experimented by Israeli leadership, that having control over a population that is not really the citizens of the state that is exerting authority, and essentially that situation itself makes the authority an illegal authority. Palestinians are not the citizens of Israel, are they? So on what basis that Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying that Prime Minister will continue to exert control and want to have absolute control over the territories that is not part of Israel? These are all the illegalities that Prime Minister and all those people, unfortunately, whoever the Prime Minister is surrounded with, they are misguiding the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Netanyahu is a seasoned politician, not a rookie or an amateur, has been there for so long, the longest serving Prime Minister of Israel, and seen the events turning around under different leadership, including own tenure. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister is unwilling to change course. What is that led the region into? It's extremely tense, and the sparks are flying all across the region. Not to mention United States is in the front line. Rather than diffusing and extinguishing the fire, more than happy to fuel the fire, and that is what they have done in terms of the funding of Gaza war, providing all kinds of defense hardware, the military weapons, however and by whatever means, that has also made this war the outcome that we are seeing right now, with the innocent population paying the price and Israeli hostages still held by Hamas. When we are looking at the solution to this dire situation right now is for Israel to cease fire, and that has to also apply to United States. Unfortunately, United States administration is not really run by the members who the public seem to see. The optics are way different from the operatives behind the scenes, and now the operatives behind the scenes running the United States administration, they need to understand that this cannot go on in this belligerent manner. The world cannot afford constant fireworks in different regions. That has been the way in the last decade under the pretext of Arab Spring, and earlier on by the predecessor when they embarked on the project for New American Century, going one nation after another, that the world and United States should remember what it has been like, not to mention the economic liability that United States taxpayers are still dealing with. That somehow never appeared to be a problem for those who are always on the agenda of getting involved in warfare wherever possible. And the loss of lives are always dismissed as quote-unquote collateral damages, so they really don't care about it. But at least they should also take into account the fortune that is being squandered when they are going out to spill blood. This blood and treasure both should matter. More importantly, the lives of the people should be the priority, but that is not really the priority when the decisions are made to go to war. Gaza war right now requires immediate ceasefire, and that ceasefire has to be permanent, not this so-called humanitarian pause and then resuming business as usual. The people who have paid the price for no fault of theirs, the children, the innocent civilians, women, young men, elderly, the sick, the old, all of them. What did they do? For no fault of theirs, they have been forced to pay a price. Now that no matter what kind of strategy is being deployed to claim victory, that will never ever be a victory for anyone, especially at the loss of so many lives. And why is it that politics, for them only their life matters, but then when it comes to their civilian lives, no matter where it is not as important as it is always when it comes to their own life. Gaza war, the solution again is immediate ceasefire. When that happens, then there will be no question of Houthis from Yemen. I would also like to mention that Houthis from Yemen, it is understandable that they are responding to the plight of Gazan population, the Palestinian population, which is heart-wrenching to say the least. But at the same time, the Houthis in Yemen, who have also suffered enormously due to the warfare in Yemen, and the people in Yemen are also in great pain and misery for all the devastating wars that they've had to deal with up until now. The Houthis in Yemen should also consider the fact that they cannot go around attacking any other cargo freights that are passing by the Red Sea, and that only makes the matter worse. And as it has turned out to be, the problem definitely is with the Israeli leadership. There is no doubt about it in terms of not coming in terms with reality and insisting on continuing this warfare, especially this relentless bombing and shelling of Gaza. But then the Houthis in Yemen are also supposed to restrain from conflating this warfare by not targeting all those freights that are crossing the Red Sea, that is only making this an international conflict. It is also understandable that Iran is, on the other hand, having been the supporter, and also they have been providing different aid, whether it's be the weapons and logistic support to different factions in Syria, in Lebanon with Hezbollah, Hamas in Gaza, and then of course the Houthis in Yemen. But then now Iran is dragged into this yet another situation with Pakistan. And that is really clear that this whole idea of making this warfare not just a regional conflict, but now it appears that they want to protract this war into a global warfare. That is the last thing that one can possibly afford around this time, especially the world population having been through this global pandemic not long ago. It was just 2-3 years ago, and again, even it was 3 years means it was dragged into another 2 years. Even there are some who are still dealing with it, and perhaps will have to consider that as a lifetime health issue for some. When that has not yet been over completely, starting another global warfare, especially with nations that are nuclear states, it is not clear what exactly the agenda is for those who are aggressively involved and instigating this catastrophe. Perhaps they think that they are the ones who run the world. So there is the information for them, and the message is, even if they, for some reason or another, they consider that they are the ones who run the world and they are the ones who are in control, I would like to remind them that they are being delusional. The world is not in any shape or form under their control and authority. If at all they think that is how it is and that is how it should be. They never created this world. They are not in control, even if they want to remain in control, for they too have to leave this world. Their time will also come. When that happens, then all that they would be leaving behind is destruction and devastation. I would like to let them know that this whole idea of them ruling this world and being in control of the world is nothing more than a delusion. The world was created by the force, whether a believer or non-believer. The force that created the world is the force as Almighty God. The one and only Almighty God is the one created the world, is the one who is protecting and preserving the world, even long before the members who think that they are in charge of this world, long before their arrival in this world has been protected and preserved by the force that is the actual creator. That is the force that is also in control now and will be in control even after these forces who think that they are in control after their departure. So this message has to be understood clearly by those individuals right now who have delusionally taken for granted that everything will happen to suit their whims and fancies. They can just go around with their depopulation agenda. The depopulation agenda is the one that triggered the global pandemic. And now the depopulation agenda looks like it is not being laid to rest. The global conflict is now being contrived, or at least it's in the manufacturing phase. That is why we see this unnecessary provocation, creating this regional conflict, beginning with Middle East, knowing that Middle East is very volatile. And then so begin with the volatile region and then let it spill over. And then when that happens, then you get another region involved, not barring the nuclear weapons. All that it takes is for one or two factions to become impatient, not even deliberate on how serious the situation would be if they even were to consider the nuclear option. It is really a very precarious situation right now, and the world is being led towards the danger zone. And that is not what the world needs to head regardless of whoever thinks that they are in control, and they will be able to manipulate and maneuver and lead this world towards a destination extremely undesirable, to say the least. But it's also something that is going to be cataclysmic for the entire humanity at large. When the forces who are behind triggering the conflict, whatever their agenda might be, they need to pause, step back, even completely remove themselves. It is time for them to remove themselves from these activities. They have done enough damage, and I don't think the world needs them anymore, especially the ones who are constantly involved in nothing but destruction, creating chaos, and making lives miserable for all. The world can live without those forces and elements, and those forces need to be removed wherever they are and however they are in terms of their power and authority, whether in disguise, running administrations via proxy, as it happens to be. There is no need for those forces to remain incognito and running the gamut entirely for their personal interest. Gaza war is definitely the foundation for the ongoing development. So in order to settle the situation peacefully, again, I reiterate that it is to begin with permanent ceasefire, release of all hostages from both sides, that is the prisoners in Israel's prison or Palestinian prison maintained by Israel, and the release of all hostages held by Hamas. So that has to take place simultaneously. And with the ceasefire, the matter does not end there. The next immediate issue is Palestinian statehood, and that has to be taken into account along with the issues that are being considered, like, as I said, ceasefire and exchange of hostages. It has to follow with the recognition of Palestinian statehood. In Palestinian statehood, it has been detailed and it will be presented once again. Basically, it would be the territories pre-1967 and the right to return. This is entirely the Palestinians' right. Just like Israel has maintained that Israeli citizens, no matter where they are, whichever part of the world they happen to live, Israel had gone out of the way to have those people, whether willingly or unwillingly, or incentivize them to move into not necessarily just the parts of Israel, but also establish these illegal settlements in West Bank and so on. Having done that, Israeli leadership or Israeli politics do not have the right to tell Palestinians that they do not have any right to return to their homeland. That right is their individual inalienable right, and that cannot be denied by a foreign authority. That being the case, it would be the return of right for the Palestinian people to return to their homeland when Palestinian territories are liberated from Israel's occupation, which has to commence immediately. It cannot be procrastinated. It cannot be deferred or denied. It has to happen, and this is something that is a priority. Palestinian statehood, Palestinian rights, and no matter what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have in terms of own policies, but the problem is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel has caused tremendous pain and suffering for the Israeli citizens, not to mention the idea of democracy has been upended by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in this term in office, which is completely unfortunate. Even the process that has taken place to subordinate Israel's judiciary, but then it turns out that the Israel judiciary just salvaged that with 8-7 votes from what I noticed in the decision that was taken. But then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not really prioritized Israel or the population in Israel over own political ambition to remain in power perhaps for lifetime. And that is what has now led the Israeli citizens asking the Prime Minister to step down and allow early election, which I think is what any leadership who cares about their country and the citizens would do in respect for the citizens' will and also for the sake of their own country, is something that is required of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for this has gone too long and this is not something that can be evaded anymore. There comes a time when no matter whatever means and tactics are explored to avoid and avert the consequences of any wrongdoing, that only gets exacerbated, and then it just leads to a dead end. And that is where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing right now, a dead end. It is in the best interest of Israel for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step down from office and allow the Israeli people, the citizens in Israel, to heal as well. They've also gone through enough in terms of this entire process of upending democracy and the way they were treated when they took to the streets expressing their disapproval of Prime Minister Netanyahu's measures to curb democracy and even the judiciary that was being subordinated in the legislation that was passed or enacted prior to October 7. Any leadership that cares about their nation and the people would do without having to be reminded or even forced upon them. As for the population in Gaza, the humanitarian aid must begin without any further delay. Whatever lives that have been lost is extremely tragic and it was completely unnecessary. Yet it was carried out in vengeance, a political vendetta, without heeding any international concerns and even condemnation. But then what is that delivered? Disappointment, destruction, and now Israel is in the worst position than it was before. The notion that one can gain a lot by destroying someone else next to nothing, what does that give them? Worse than what they were before. And that is what Israel is experiencing right now. Another question I want to raise with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, since the Prime Minister is the one who is adamantly proceeding with this belligerence and warfare in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu, the citizens in Israel also died during the pandemic, the global pandemic, coronavirus. Israel suffered many pandemic deaths, far more than the Israeli casualties, citizens who were killed in Hamas attack, which again was definitely very tragic, and no one is in the right mind would condone that action. But also, like as I said, it is equally important to acknowledge that oppression, colonization, and brutal occupation, with apartheid becoming the way of life, is only going to turn anybody away against anyone. And that led to that situation, even though, again, violence is not something I ever condone against anybody, but it happened in retaliation. What Israel has done is, in any court of law, if there were to be a fair system, would be recognized and convicted as war crime. And that is precisely what has happened in this Gaza war, not even sparing any civilian facilities. Even as I speak, the bombing and shelling continues like never before. How can anyone possibly reach any peaceful resolution when the violence continues with the military aggression and piling up more casualties with no consideration for life, no matter how young they are or how old are they, yet they want to just continue? And what about your own IDF members, the IDF personnel? Coming to the question, I want to know, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, global pandemic, many Israeli citizens lost their life. Many, far more than what the number Israel suffered in Hamas attack. Far more. And many Israeli citizens have also experienced and sustained health hazards and health issues, some of them permanent health issues from the coronavirus and pandemic. Did you consider taking action against those responsible for the coronavirus, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Now it is clarified and even acknowledged, even if it is behind the closed doors of Congress halls and chambers. Nonetheless, it's better late than never. The NIH former director has acknowledged that it is a lab leak. The virus that, when I published it right at the time of the pandemic, only I know what kind of threats and harassment and nastiness that I had to deal with, which even otherwise I continue to endure until now, regardless of who says what. But the one who's experiencing knows what happens when you continue to speak the truth. Nothing but the truth. Nonetheless, I want to say to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel suffered enormously, just like any other nation, but even more, I would say, in terms of sustaining the ill effects of the virus. And then even with vaccines, there were some reports regarding the youth population in Israel. They had issues. Did you consider taking action against China, Europe, United States? All of them have been involved. The outrage, anger, the frustration that has been expressed over the loss of lives in Hamas attack, which I understand, loss of lives under any circumstances, not just from terrorism or warfare or pandemic, whatever it is, however it is, loss of life is extremely tragic and regrettable, and it should be prevented at all costs, but that doesn't happen. My question is, when you had not even considered a discussion with any of them, when we come to think of it, those citizens from Israel who lost their lives, they were all Israeli citizens, were they not? And to be even specific, Jewish faith, they were Jews. Israeli Jewish citizens also lost their lives during the pandemic, as they did with during Hamas attack. But then there has been no reaction or any steps taken against those who have been responsible for this dreadful, deadly virus that has consumed millions of lives world over, including the citizens in Israel. And yet you never bothered to even talk about it in public and saying that you were going to take action against any of those nations, China, Europe, United States. The same thing would apply to your own response, Prime Minister Netanyahu, to your citizens when they took to the streets in disapproval of your action in upending democracy, as the Israeli citizens felt when you were extremely determined and went further in your own words in one of your interviews with the US media, that you said that, quote, judiciary needs to be clamped down they have to be curbed, and the power should remain with the legislative, even to be specific, the executive branch, end quote. In other words, you didn't want judiciary to have any power over politics in legislative or executive branch. You felt that you could go to any length and extent to curb judiciary from curbing any violations from the executive and legislative branch. Any corruption scandals, any extraordinary events and activities that takes place ultimately is brought to the judiciary notice, is it not? The Supreme Court as the highest court on land. But then you didn't want that to happen. So in your words, you said judiciary should not have that kind of power over legislative or especially executive branch, keeping in mind your own problem, the corruption scandal that you're dealing with, you're involved with. In the course of that action, Prime Minister Netanyahu, when you did that, and the people in Israel were not happy, obviously, and they took to the streets and they protested for months, and everyone across the industry and field, different occupation, as a matter of fact, even your IDF forces, they refused to fly the planes in Air Force, and all the diplomats in Israeli embassies, they also joined the rest of Israeli citizens in protest against your action. You also adopted some very violent means. Some of them were beaten, some of them even died. At that time, it did not matter that you were hurting your own Israeli population, the Jewish citizens. That is something needs to be realized when you expressed no concern over the loss of lives, Israeli lives, Jewish lives during the pandemic, which has been far higher and greater than the loss of lives that took place in Hamas attack, which is not being justified here, but I'm mentioning in terms of your assessment that how you regard your citizens' lives. When it is convenient, you want to use that situation for political reason. When it is not convenient and when it is necessary, you choose to remain silent. How does that make any political leadership being concerned about the lives of own citizens when there was the need for your leadership to step up to the plate and ask and demand these nations the reason behind their involvement, and also the way that you have responded to Hamas? It's not just Hamas, the Palestinian people are the ones that you have targeted. The whole idea of Western narrative saying that it's Israeli-Hamas war itself is very misleading. It is not Israeli-Hamas war, it's Israel attacking the people of Palestine, the Palestinians. It's not just Hamas that has been involved in the casualties, the Hamas leaders who have been assassinated by Israeli IDF and Israeli politics. The massive casualties has resulted among the population in Palestine. The narrative from the Western media, or for that matter anyone else is following suit, it would apply to them as well, that it is Israel versus Hamas is incorrect and misleading. It is Israel against Palestine. That is what has resulted in the nearly 30,000 casualties, with about at least 10,000 among them being children. Why is it that Western media continues to propagate this false narrative? Is it this notion that everyone's eyes are closed and their minds as well, that they would just go along with whatever is being presented and inundated with in different form of communication outlets? It's important to at least be a little bit fair and honest in the narrative and presentation, and to say what it is, go along with what the reality is. And the reality is Israel versus Palestine. For Palestinian population are the ones who have now paid the price in this genocide, this egregious, horrendous genocide that has taken place. and continues as I speak. That is why I come back to this question to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Your Israeli citizens have suffered with the loss of lives during the pandemic. Your response was muted, and that goes for their allies in the United States, which is not surprising since they have been involved as well. But then the rest of them as well, whoever has been joining the bandwagon, whether it's EU, Germany in particular, and others saying that Israel has the right to self-defense. Israel did not have the right to self-defense when Israel's population lost their lives in their dreadful coronavirus that was lab manufactured and leaked for innocent population to die. What is the response compared to the way Israel and the rest of allies, whether it's EU and United States, claiming that Israel has every right to defend itself and going after the entire Palestinian population in the so-called self-defense and the offense that has been carried out for such a long time now, again with no end in sight and completely adamant, refusing to even pause for humanitarian aid to reach the victims. How does that even rationalize, if at all there is any room for rationality in politics? There are events which is disproportionately different in terms of the population who died from the pandemic. No response, no reaction, and it has been just taken as, well, unfortunate. And again, own politics with the corruption scandal and everything, and citizens getting tired, and they say that we are not going to allow our democracy to be violated or upended. So they take to the streets, and then politics reacts violently towards them, making some of them even lose their lives. At that time, it doesn't matter that you are taking your own citizens' lives. But then it mattered when what happened, and again taking it so further that you have reduced the entire Gaza to rubbles, and you're still not satisfied. You want every child, woman, and living, breathing being in that territory to pay the price. How come it didn't even occur when that happened with the pandemic, when far more people died from the pandemic? This is what creates this situation of politics. How genuine is politics when they get involved in warfare, the violence they inflict on innocent population using any pretext. But in this instance, even if you keep citing Hamas, you should have taken similar or even extreme measure against all those nations who were responsible for the dreadful virus that claimed many, many Israeli lives, far more than what the number you lost in Hamas attack. But then you have inflicted even far greater on the population in Gaza. And what is the result? Quagmire. Now the region is almost in flames. The region is so tense that everyone is like fighting with somebody or another. But this is all the creation of the leadership who would not heed to anyone's concern, again, who would not relent to any peaceful opportunity and resolution. Anyways, that cannot be the status quo anymore. It has to end. Citizens on all sides, Palestinians and Israelis, all that they are asking for is for them to live a normal life. And that normal life could only be made possible with the immediate permanent ceasefire, release of all hostages held by Israel, all of them. It's not going to be that we are going to count 10 for one person, that kind of, this is not some rationing. We are talking about human lives, human population who have been unfairly detained for years and perhaps even more than a decade. That's how it appears to be from the ones who have been released recently on their accounts. They say that how they have been held in detention for so long, denied of any contacts with their family, their legal representatives. That has to end, and it has to be exchanged, and Hamas releasing all of Israelis' hostages simultaneously. This has to occur so that the population on both sides can begin their recovery. It's going to take a long time for them to heal. And that is something that has to be provided to them by bringing this horrible, this terrible violence, this bloodshed to an end. I underscore the fact that the whole idea of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejecting Palestinian statehood and Palestinian independence is not a viable position for Israel or Israeli leadership, no matter who is going to be in power, whether it is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which should not be the case, and Israel has suffered enough. Israeli population are also expecting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step aside, allowing early elections, which is the viable option for people in Israel. That being said, no matter who is going to be in power in Israel, whoever is going to be backing Israel, however, all of them are being reminded that the Palestinian statehood cannot be tossed in the back burner or shelved permanently as a lost case. That is not a lost case. As a matter of fact, that is the case now, well and alive, and it has to be recognized, it has to be established, and that is the only way Israel and Palestine, and that goes for the entire region, can exist in peace. Unless and until that happens, no matter who tries, whatever tricks and tactics that are being deployed is only going to backfire at them. And I emphasize it will backfire at the sources. And it is not to be taken for granted that the force that created this entire world, including them, is going to be a silent spectator while they think that they will just set this entire world in flames by triggering nuclear states to attack or get involved in unnecessary skirmishes and incursions with their rivals. I mean, this is really very dirty politics that is being played, and it's not surprising to me at all. So if the way it is being figured out or configured is that you have the team of nations who are now together in favor of Palestinian cause, and in order to isolate them, what you do is you go and pick another neighbor just in case that they don't ally with the forces that the ones that are considered rivals. You create a scenario, which is what has happened. Iran striking this particular group in Pakistan, Balochistan, it so happens that group in Balochistan that Iran seemed to have targeted is linked with Israel. If there is enough evidence to that effect, then that is completely provocative. Israeli-linked group in Balochistan. Israel's involvement in Balochistan is not to be ruled out, for it has happened earlier as well. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, I mentioned in one of my own publications about Israel's involvement in Balochistan that has been detected and identified with Israel's Israeli agents in Balochistan. They were detected and that caused problems earlier on. And I did talk about it. So I'm not surprised if that has happened again. Iran targeting that group, and which again I believe there has been a civilian casualty, if I'm not mistaken. A woman and 2 children, I believe, have been killed in the process, which is extremely unfortunate and tragic. Loss of lives is always regrettable and tragic, and especially civilian lives is something that always happens in these crossfire. If that has happened, it is extremely regrettable. Pakistan in return retaliating for Iran's strike and so on. And this is the perfect situation that is created by those who want to pit one against another. This whole idea of divide and conquer strategy never dies. It's vindictive, malicious, and it's also, when you come to think of it, there has not been any repercussions that has been taken into account either. That how having a nuclear state Pakistan to have issues with Iran, if that reaches the tipping point, hopefully it does not, because both Iran and Pakistan being Islamic nations, regardless of whatever denominations they happen to follow and maintain in their respective domains, nonetheless, at the end of the day, their faith is a common one belonging to Islamic faith. Keeping that in mind, all of them should only make sincere efforts to forge peace and not get involved in any kind of hostility and rivalry. That's the last thing one needs. So this is something that needs to be addressed by both Iran and Pakistan, I would say, and not to give any opportunity to such provocateurs. What they're really looking for is isolation of their rivals, when they think that how can we isolate a rival, and that would be to another one who has something even more potent, such as a nuclear weapon, and then anything that sparks from there is expected to get ignited, and then the rest is history. I don't think it is in the best interest of either Pakistan or Iran to even go that far. The leaderships should be able to resolve any differences in situations that has happened and see how they can amicably resolve this without letting this boil over. For there are always opportunists to exploit the situation, for they are not going to really pay any attention to the consequences, as they never do. All that they are aiming for is their political ambitions, remaining in power as long as it takes an entire lifetime, when the lifetime position is becoming the hot favorite in politics right now. So they are doing everything that is possible to be the lifetime appointees, whether by proxy or in incognito or active, meaning in public face. Otherwise, via proxy, they want to just maintain their power. This is a situation that they always rely on to see how they can trigger a hostile situation and then let that take its course. Incumbent US administration offered to provide Pakistan whatever artillery and means they require to go against Iran. This is the kind of politics we are witnessing today. Rather than putting out the fire, they are in the front line to fuel the fire. And this is, again, supposedly Democrats. Democrats position themselves as the dove.
Not to mention the Nobel Peace Prize winning presidency and administration now in action.
And the Republicans as the hawks. Who is being more hawkish than whom? Events describe that. Actions speak louder than words. That is what makes any kind of narratives true or false. For one can only judge anything from actions. The situation that is evolved right now needs to be simmered, resolved peacefully. There is no room for any further provocation leading to the confrontation, military or otherwise, like we have witnessed since the onset of Gaza war, Houthis from Yemen, and then the simultaneous warfare around the region, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. Oh, that's another thing, attacking the US base. That is something that the United States administration and Congress have to think about. How the Gaza war has gotten so out of control and proportion that now the US base is paying the price. US defense personnel stationed in Iraq, Syria are all paying the price. US based, the defense personnel are being brought back home, not just because they wanted to evacuate. It's only after they have sustained and they're suffering from traumatic brain injury coming from the strikes from the regional players. What is all triggering this? It's the Gaza war and refusing to ceasefire. Why not just ceasefire without any further escalation in the region, or for that matter in the global domain? That is the priority and cannot possibly be rejected anymore. I don't think any politics and political leadership are in a position to reject this option any longer, for the world cannot always be brought in turmoil, and again with the escalation of warfare, whether it be Gaza or Russia and Ukraine. And that in that part of the world, what is happening is NATO preparing. I believe it's just the timing of it is also quite interesting, I would say. Like I just mentioned in my post this morning, the timing of it is always very intriguing. The global pandemic, the coronavirus, was unleashed when? During the presidential election year 2020. And now the talk of global warfare, with already wars in effect, with Russian-Ukraine war entering the third year, Gaza war into the fourth month. And what more they need? It's not just now restricted to Gaza war, it's just entire region. In quest for power, warmongering is considered the foundation, and to prolong their position of power and authority, if war is being opted as the viable choice, they are mistaken. People, electorate, and population in general are war fatigued. They're also tired of these continuous and relentless pain and suffering that is being inflicted, whether through the bio-warfare, that was the global pandemic, coronavirus, that was bio-warfare, and then the conventional warfare, and already they have to deal with the economic warfare, which is the inflation, the taxes, and the interest rates. Isn't that enough? Now the world has to be drawn into the quagmire, and every region has to be confronted with hostility and military confrontation, not to mention the nuclear options that are involved as well. I definitely want to add this, that Pakistan, promoted by United States, as in saying that Pakistan will be provided with necessary ammunitions by United States, which happens to be coming right from the horse's mouth, to say the least. This is coming directly from incumbent administration President Joe Biden, which I don't really believe as President Joe Biden. It's coming from behind the scenes. If that is the case, I also want to remind the people in Pakistan as well as the leadership in Pakistan, and that is, let us travel back, shall we? Pakistan was approached by United States, the so-called war on terror. Remember Pakistan? You were approached by United States in 2001 after 9/11 attack on American soil, which I have talked about it anyways, but to be on the subject, I want to share this with the people and leadership in Pakistan, that when you were approached by United States following 9/11 and you were asked to be United States ally, the so-called war on terror, and then the war against Afghanistan, Pakistan was the ally, or rather the proxy, fighting the war for United States in Afghanistan or against Afghanistan. And when that happens, yes, United States also paid billions of dollars. They'll say that they paid billions of dollars, which is true, but whom did they pay that billions of dollars to? General Pervez Musharraf and those who happened to be the ones in charge at that time, but they are the ones who could best explain what exactly they did with those billions of dollars that they received from the United States. What I want to say is, when Pakistan was instrumental in being the ally to United States in the so-called war on terror against Afghanistan and in Afghanistan, and in the course, what happened? Pakistan was left with more terror factions, terror outfits, whether it be in the Swat Valley or in the region
Waziristan,
where the Taliban had taken refuge in Pakistan. More terror outfits, more terror factions ended up in Pakistan, and then Pakistan was branded the terror state. Pakistan also where this would apply to those who were involved in instigating those terror outfits who had taken refuge in Pakistan to cause terror activities, whether it be in India or anywhere else. That also happened.
Within Pakistan, with bomb blasts in major cities of the country.
My reminder to Pakistan and Pakistani leadership is, regardless of how many billions of dollars United States happen to pay then or right now, ask Pakistan to be their ally. The intelligent answer would be to say no, if Pakistan has ever learned a lesson. The other thing I also want to remind Pakistan leadership and the people in Pakistan is that when NATO was involved in Afghanistan as United States ally, US and NATO invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, NATO bombed Pakistan's personnel who were out in the post safeguarding the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, and NATO knew very well that they were Pakistani defense personnel, Pakistani soldiers who were the ones who were stationed, and there were enough information, clarification, yet they went ahead and bombed, and at least 24 or 25 of them, there was like massive casualties among Pakistani Defense Force who were stationed there, that was bombed by NATO, again with no apology from NATO or, for that matter, the incumbent leadership, which was at that time Barack Obama administration, refused to even apologize. And I distinctly remember, and I also published a post condemning that action. And I want to remind all of them, this was an incident that was terrible, that the Pakistani Defense Force, as an ally to United States and NATO, were on duty, and they were posted in their across the border with Afghanistan, and all of that was well known. It was not something that was an inadvertent incident. It was on radar as well. But then in the bombing, there were massive casualties suffered and no apology. The least one could have offered is an apology to the loss of lives. Apology was refused by Barack Obama and Barack Obama administration. I'm saying this looking right in the eye of the people who claim to be sacrosanct. The other thing that also happened was Pakistan's sovereign territory being violated in the so-called Abbottabad mission. The Abbottabad mission, that was nothing but a hoax. Osama bin Laden was long dead. Osama bin Laden died from renal failure in December 2001. That's incontrovertible fact. And yet it was manipulated for 2012 re-election reason. And this whole Abbottabad mission itself was a hoax. Innocent people died. And what happened to the Navy SEAL, the Team 6? The entire crew were assassinated. And these are all the facts that politics has managed to cover up. One can cover, but one cannot hide forever. These are all some abhorrent sins that have been committed with abuse of power, with little or no respect for others' lives, while caring so deeply about their own, at the expense of the taxpayers. This happens to be the trend in politics. And those crimes and sins are invariably protected and hidden behind political impunity, which is a shame, especially an embarrassment for this so-called democracy. Politics needs to be told, it's about time. These are the things that Pakistan needs to remember. For that matter, any nation. This whole thing about exploiting people's lives, whether it be the defense force personnel, whether own defense personnel or the foreign land. And that goes for the civilian population as well. Violation of foreign sovereign territory. No matter whoever thinks what about themselves as superpower and whatnot. No nation has the authority or right to just arbitrarily go and launch airstrikes and conduct missions, taking it for granted that the entire universe is under their control. And that kind of politics needs to end. For that only speaks of presumptuousness and arrogance. There is a lot to think about for Pakistan's politics and leadership. Understandably, Pakistan is always experiencing and subject to endless political turmoil and turbulence. Even democratically elected leaderships are overthrown from office, which is the norm anyways. But then it happens more so in Pakistan, in that part of the world. This is something that needs to be recognized and even debated among the people in Pakistan, whether it is acceptable to them for foreign powers to violate their sovereignty, territorial integrity, and while the defense personnel are killed with the bombing despite knowledge and information, and yet with no apology, and then come back again to say that you're going to be your ally. I mean, these are some very deceitful politics that is replayed time and time again. It's time to think about these events. When events happen, they're also a reminder not to be repeated again. As for the nuclear Pakistan being pitted against militarily powerful Iran, and then what happens? The region itself is volatile. This is Middle East, but then I'm also referring to Indian subcontinent. If Pakistan is dragged into this quagmire through provocation and through these hatched situations where you have a group tied to Israel and then Iran finding out and launching strike, and then retaliation, this back and forth and all that, what is happening now? Now there is another new scenario that has been created alongside, as if whatever is happening is not enough. So what happens with India being another nuclear nation as well? I mean, I'm not going to take that lightly, because with the leadership that is in place in India, also been loose about the rhetoric, and the rhetoric has been that India's nuclear weapons are not meant to be
quote unquote
Diwali firecrackers, which means that when necessary, the Indian leadership and the BJP government would not hesitate to use nuclear arsenal. And this is the kind of this time and situation that one should be concerned about. It's very unnerving. Any rhetoric and statements that are made by leaderships as head of the state, that cannot be slighted, whether it is to arouse their captive audience or to impress upon anyone else that they are expecting favors from, or to intimidate their neighbors, whatever it is. When these statements are made in public and they are made with affirmation, they can't possibly be neglected and not taken seriously. This is the reason I am deeply concerned about the developments that are happening and the way it is being propelled, escalated, and it is not something that is going to serve anyone's interest. No matter whatever the objectives and agenda there might be, it is not going to be in favor. It will not deliver the desirable outcome they're expecting. On the contrary, it is only going to be destructive, counterproductive, and unfortunately irreversible. And that needs to be averted at all cost. And I mean at all cost. And this is the responsibility for all members in politics worldwide, and especially in the region, the political leaderships, the people who are in position of power and authority in the Middle East, in the Indian subcontinent, in Europe, and that goes for worldwide. It has to be taken seriously, and this has to be averted right now. The world cannot afford for another meltdown. For there are some really those forces and members who are involved either up front or behind the scenes. They're obviously not thinking. All that they are focused on is power, position, winning elections. But then at what cost? At the cost of the nations, the people, the entire world? This is indeed a very dangerous and dire situation the world is being led into, and this has to be stopped on its track. And that can only happen with the ceasefire in Gaza. And that needs to be done right now with no excuses or any kind of explanations that is going to satisfy. For this is the only remedy that the world has, to begin with Gaza ceasefire that would make the region retreat from their positions right now, and every one of them would obviously reverse course from the active military interventions to settling into peaceful resolutions. And that is what the world needs. And more than anything, the people in Gaza, the people in Palestine, they need to be liberated. Liberation of Palestine is the priority, and it cannot possibly be delayed or deferred anymore. And that goes for the people in Israel, the hostages held by Hamas, to be released simultaneously with the release of all the prisoners by Israel, with permanent ceasefire and getting ready for the establishment of Palestinian statehood, Palestinian independence, and with Israeli occupation, colonization coming to an end on a permanent basis. And I end this topic with this note that let us all hope for peace and work towards a peaceful resolution for the sake of the entire humanity and the world as well as environment. Thank you.
Khuda Hafiz.